As a reporter, I've traveled the Middle East for many years. It's an area that has always fascinated me, but in my work, I've mainly covered its war zones, its crises, and its tragedies. This journey, which takes me down the Silk Road in the footsteps of Marco Polo, gives me the opportunity of exploring the great historical and cultural significance of this part of the world, its ancient melting pot of peoples and civilizations that have contributed so much to our own. The singing sand fills the air with the sounds of all sorts of musical instruments, as well as the noise of drums and the striking of weapons. Thus wrote Marco Polo, telling of his epic journey across the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts in the great Chinese Far West. After the trials of the Taklamakan, the caravans officially arrived in China. The first watering point at the edge of the desert, the Oasis of Dunhuang, was at the crossroads of the Silk Road. In the Uyghur language, Taklamakan means the place from which one does not return. Marco Polo said that this was because of the jinns, or desert demons, which called caravan drivers from June to June and misled them. In practical terms, this is the phenomenon of singing sand due to the sliding of sand displaced by the wind. Only one animal can endure the crossing of these vast deserts of the Chinese Great West, and that is the Bactrian camel. The camel breeder, Yan Shi, is the first person we meet who speaks Mandarin, the language of the Han ethnic group and the official language of the People's Republic of China. Although bordering the Uyghur region, culturally, we are well and truly in China now. What's particular about the Bactrian camel? What makes it so well adapted to this region?
The particularity of the Bactrian camel is its enormous energy. They have much more energy than a dromedary. For long journeys, they are clearly much more robust. They're overflowing with energy.
And what sort of distance can a well-trained camel cover each day between caravan stages?
Generally speaking, a camel carrying merchandise can cover more than 20 kilometers a day, even up to 25 kilometers. For long journeys, we usually carry water with us. If we ration it, we can give them something to drink once a week, or even every 2 weeks.
So at what moment does a camel draw on the reserves in its hump?
The hump represents a source of energy for the camel. This is where it draws its energy, and not directly from water. It consumes the fat stocked inside its hump. As it gradually consumes this fat, the hump deflates little by little.
What made you decide to become a breeder? Is it a family tradition or a passion?
I chose this profession because of the economic situation in the region. We do this to earn a living. We're people of the land. And in addition to agriculture, we can develop tourism in places. That's why we decided to try and become involved by raising camels and thereby increasing our income.
Today, does the Bactrian camel still have a role to play outside of tourism? Do certain nomads still use them?
Today, the majority of camels can be found in the tourist areas or zoos. They're used for outings.
These days, it's clear that camels are hardly used by anybody except tourists. But in China, tourism is a serious business. Tens of millions of Chinese have achieved financial security over the last few years. And the middle classes are discovering holidays. For Beijing, it's a question of directing the sun-lotion-daubed, selfie-stick-wielding hordes towards the treasures of the vast Gobi region. It's a way of helping to integrate the Uyghurs, along with the tens of other minority ethnic groups of the Great West, into the national culture. Tourists are a godsend for the vast desert expanses of Chinese Turkestan. For centuries, the Gobi region was separated from the world. Since the end of the caravan age, at the turn of the Middle Ages, the stage-post towns along the Silk Road have become self-orientated. The famous traveller, Elamayar, neatly refers to them as the forbidden oases. But tourist development brings a new form of erosion to this fragile ecosystem. The geographer, Dunhuang, studies, amongst other things, the movement of dunes under the effect of the dominant winds and the resulting impacts on the site of the Crescent Moon Pagoda on the outskirts of Dunhuang. How do you explain that the immense dunes around us don't engulf the Buddhist pagoda and the oasis?
The Crescent Moon Oasis is preserved because wind comes from the east and keeps the sand back. By studying the way in which the wind blows, we discovered that it was from a generally eastern direction, and there were many trees and buildings which hindered it. So we cut down the trees and demolished the buildings to the east. That allowed the wind to penetrate and carry the sand from both sides towards the dunes. The wind which blows across the oasis is the means of its preservation.
Is your study of sand only useful in the protection of historic sites, or does it have other applications in modern life?
We study the laws governing sand movement in the desert, the influence this movement has upon human activity, but also on towns, roads, transport, including high-speed trains, and also historic monuments. We study with minute precision the dangers which sand movement represents. In this way, we hope to protect monuments and infrastructure.
In your opinion, have the dunes moved very much, or were traders at the time of the Silk Road, like for example Marco Polo, greeted by the same landscape?
Between the time of Marco Polo and the present day, there haven't been any great changes at an environmental level, but the look of the oasis has changed completely. The surface area of the water has diminished, and particularly over there were many temples and houses. Everything was demolished, and the water which disappeared only returned during the 1990s.
While crossing the desert, Marco Polo describes a terrifying phenomenon, which he calls demons. Today, we know that what he was talking about was singing sand. But can you explain what physically produces this?
The place where the sand sings, as Marco Polo describes, is right here. During the Han Dynasty, it was noticed that as soon as the sand here began to slide, it would make a noise. In fact, on the surface of a grain of sand, there are many holes. When it slides, they knock into each other, which produces this noise.
China has more than 1.3 billion inhabitants. It's the most populated country in the world. And even though it's one of the largest, there's beginning to be a serious lack of space in the fertile regions of the south and the east. So Beijing has decided to direct the overspill towards the great expanses of the Gobi. Han, the ethnic majority, are already almost as numerous as the Uyghurs in the northwestern provinces. Airport, motorways, 30-story buildings, the sleepy oasis of Dunhuang is being modernized at lightning speed with the help of colossal investment. So, since the menu is only in Chinese, I'll have to make a guess. Ah, tea! For the interviews, I have a translator. But this evening, I need to get by on my own. To be consumed in moderation. Chinese beer. Ganbei! It's a bit spicy. Actually, very spicy. But it's good. Cold tagliatelle. I think from rice. It's not wheat pasta, it's rice pasta. I'm eating the Chinese way, which is not quite like our own. It's a bit noisier, but with these sort of chopsticks, it's quite efficient. You need to be agile to eat spicy tagliatelle with chopsticks. And beer helps too. Historically, the oases of the Gobi Desert are where Indian, Iranian and Chinese influences came together. For travellers along the Silk Road, it was a foretaste of the Middle Empire. It was in Dunhuang that Marco Polo discovered Buddhism for the first time. He was probably the first Westerner to come across this religion. He called them the idol worshippers. The Buddhism which Marco Polo came across is in fact Lamaism, that's to say Tibetan Buddhism, which at this period took in Sichuan and the whole regional curve as far as Mongolia. There was another aspect of Tibetan culture which greatly intrigued and shocked Marco Polo, and which he described as the polyandry of the Tibetans. I can certify, he wrote, that if a stranger comes to stay at a man's house, he orders his wife to do whatever the stranger pleases. Then he goes away and only comes back home when he knows the stranger has left, so that the latter can spend a good time with his wife for as long as he likes. This is good, because the women are most beautiful. You can't help feel that there's an autobiographical dimension to the description of the world. Marco Polo also indicated that Buddhists were very numerous in Dunhuang. They have many abbeys which are full of idols, to which they make rich sacrifices and show great honor and great reverence, wrote the Venetian adventurer. At the edge of Dunhuang begins the Valley of the Thousand Buddhas, one of the most important archaeological sites in all Chinese culture. The valley is hollowed out with little caves which form a sort of immense hive, 500 meters long, made up of cells and rocky halls nestling into the cliffs. While tourists come to amuse themselves in the dunes at the sacred site of one of the Thousand Buddhas, it's above all for a visit or a pilgrimage that they flock to Dunhuang. Introduced in China 2,000 years ago, Buddhism greatly prospered all along the Silk Road. Along with Confucianism and Taoism, Buddhist thinking makes up the Sanjiao, that's to say the three-school system which structures Chinese culture. The vestiges of the Dunhuang site spread out over a millennium from the 4th to the 14th century. But it was at its height during the Tang dynasty, a little before the year 1000, when the Chinese Empire spread out to the west as far as present-day Kazakhstan. Its style is that of Mogao art, or excessive cave style, explains Professor Wang, head curator of the site. An image which appears totally apt when confronted with this gigantic statue of Buddha in meditative pose. The Valley of the Thousand Buddhas contains 492 caves. This one is the most famous. Could you explain what it is we see here?
The cave in which we are standing is very well known. It's number 96. It houses the biggest Buddha in the valley. This great Buddha, which is 36.5 meters tall, was built at the end of the 7th century. The Empress Wu Zetian was in power, and she decided to build statues of Maitreya throughout her kingdom. It was under her regime that the Dunhuang people began to construct this great Buddha. Today it is the largest interior Buddha in the history of China.
Looking at this immense Buddha, we obviously think of the Buddhas of Bamiyan, which were blown up by the Taliban in Afghanistan. What's the history of Central Asian Buddhism?
If we compare this Buddha with those of Bamiyan, the latter are much older, because we know that Buddhism has its origins in India. It crossed the Middle East and then Xinjiang, before arriving in the central plain of China. It's the route which Buddhism followed, which allowed it to spread. All the art of Buddhism was created in Gandhara, a region of present-day Pakistan and Afghanistan. The original form of this Buddha was of Middle Eastern influence, from Gandhara.
Originally founded by descendants of soldiers of Alexander the Great, the Greco-Buddhist Gandhara kingdom produced the first effigies of Buddha with a human face, of which those of the Mogao Caves are descendants. What could be more moving than these last examples of Hellenic art lost in the depths of the sand of the Gobi? The Mogao Caves stand as a reminder of the movement of ideas and beliefs along the ancient Silk Road. These marvelous frescoes covering the walls depict the teachings of the Buddhas who arrived in China at the end of antiquity. But several paintings also contain earlier symbols and myths from much farther away towards the west. Certain Chinese researchers are convinced that this crowded and gaudy parietal art notably bears traces of Greek and Roman mythology. As with this image of the god of the moon and this god of the sun, shown riding a chariot like the Greek god Helios. Then there are these impish characters, which look surprisingly like certain masks out of Greco-Roman theatre. Other influences are Persian, like these armored horsemen, images from the chivalry of the Sasanians who ruled over Iran. Today, historians and curators are at total liberty to preserve these masterpieces. For several decades, the communist regime in China dreamt of a cultural revolution which would wipe out all the traces of the past. But utopias evolve, and today the authorities are pleased to show off all that has contributed to the greatness of Chinese civilization. Ah, a helmet. Of course.
Okay.
The historian Subomin is in charge of the restoration of caves which are closed to the public. In a country as highly disciplined as China, it's a huge privilege to be allowed to visit an ongoing worksite. When does this colossal statue of Buddha date from? When was it built?
This Buddha was built during the Tang Dynasty more than 1,000 years ago. Historians and archaeologists who do research into the history of these Buddhist caves consider that this Buddha would have principally been built by local artists.
What techniques were employed for statues of this size?
They first dug out the outline, the basic form, that is to say, the shape of the body of the Buddha. Next, they applied a layer of clay. Then, over the top of this clay, they added another layer of clay, which was thicker and mixed with straw. After this, they added a layer of fine clay, which was mixed with cotton, or other such thin fibers. And onto this, color was painted and motifs were added. We know that these cultural relics age with the passing of the years. They're submitted to the influence of all sorts of factors, be they natural or human. So we attempt to slow this influence down.
In Mogao, the warm and very dry air of the desert is a great help to restorers because it's helped to conserve the original pigment. So is that the original?
Yes, original.
The Chinese approach is also wonderfully innovative. There are no half measures here. The authorities decided to entirely digitalize all the walls of the Mogao Caves, from floor to ceiling, in addition to thousands of manuscripts conserved among the statues. This intricate work is directed by Professor Wu Jian and makes it possible for previously inaccessible images to be made public. Digitalizing 492 caves is a colossal task. How's it coming along?
Research into digitalization began some 20 years ago. We've now finished digitalizing the category A caves, 110 of them in all. About 120 caves have also been digitalized in 360-degree panoramic. At the same time, in April 2016, we put online the 30 most important caves in order to share them with the whole world.
Could you give me a concrete example of a historic discovery which has come about thanks to digitalization?
Yes, this huge digitalization work has produced some astonishing results. For example, in the digitalization of cave number 61, there's a large fresco depicting Mount Wutai. For this fresco, we took more than 4,000 photos, then pieced them together into one image. It contains a lot of detail which couldn't be seen before. For example, we can see images of people from the mountain, some foreigners, but also certain jokes which the painters made, like the images of benefactors who have been given pig-like noses. These things were never noticed before.
I've become increasingly aware of something with each new encounter, whether it be around the town market or visiting the caves of the Buddhas. As of Dunhuang, you really begin to enter China in the cultural and ethnic sense of the term. Borders make themselves known in many ways: barbed wire, lines painted on the ground, or a simple customs post. Most of those I've crossed have continually moved over the course of history. I've never liked borders. As with all reporters, they've often impeded me in my work or slowed down my travels. But 100 kilometers north of Dunhuang can be found one of the most famous borders of them all. Many people even claim that this is the greatest work ever undertaken by mankind: the Great Wall of China. At its very western extremity is situated the single crossing point authorized for all travelers along the Silk Road, an austere fortified gate which guarded the western limit of the Han Empire. It's called the Jade Gate. Certain travelers had to wait here for more than a year in order to obtain permission from Beijing to enter the lands of the Son of the Sky. The ancient Silk Road. It doesn't look like much with these two little granite stelae, but in fact, it's quite a moving place because we are precisely on the route of the ancient Silk Road. To the west were what the Chinese called the barbarians, and to the east was China, and merchants who wanted to enter China were obliged to head for the Jade Gate, which they went through at this precise point. This is where they passed for centuries, and therefore it was precisely here that Marco Polo passed, and here too that his Arab counterpart passed a century later, the explorer Ibn Battuta. Built between the mountains on one side and the marshes on the other, the proud fortress controlled a real bottleneck where caravans were scrutinized and smuggling was prevented. In the Jade Gate can be seen the whole point of the Great Wall. In the 2nd century BCE, the Emperor Han Wudi crushed the Xiongnu, the nomads who dominated the entire part of the Gobi, and who would become the Huns who would attack Europe. In order to protect his conquests, the emperor lengthened the Wall of China, which was 7,000 kilometers long at this point. There were no more rocks, so instead he used rammed earth, straw and gravel to continue the biggest construction that humans have ever built. Chinese civilization has a 4,000-year history. It's still considered to be the center of the world, from whence the name Middle Empire. And I finally made it here.